It was a forest of the impaled, almost 24,000 corpses, men, women, and children, stakes driven through their bodies. It was a massacre beyond imagination. Insane? Absolutely. But it wasn't just cruelty, it was a weapon, a terrifying strategy, the specter of fear. Hey, I'm Josh, and on today's episode of the Infographic Show, we'll reveal the horrifying things Vlad the Impaler did to his enemies. 1456 was a time of turbulence, of shifting powers. Loyalties changed with the wind. And for Vlad III, it was time for vengeance. The second son of Vlad Dracul, once the ruler of Wallachia, part of modern Romania, he had returned to Wallachia to reclaim his family's place as ruler. His father had been murdered, his older brother buried alive. So he had endured one betrayal after another. So when he climbed to his place at the top, Vlad III already understood the nature of his power. He knew more than most what cruelty could achieve. He saw treachery everywhere, in the nobles, in the court, in the shifting allegiances that had destroyed his family. Mercy was weakness. Mercy got you killed. There was only one way to rule: fear. And nowhere was Vlad's fearsome reputation more obvious than in the capital city of Târgoviște. So how does fear shape a ruler? One legend said Vlad's men placed a valuable golden goblet at the local fountain. Everyone could use it. Everyone had to use it. The peasants, the merchants, the wives, and the children. And yet, no one dared steal it. It would sit there at the fountain until the day Vlad died. Had it been moved from its place, the city streets would have been lined with heads on pikes. Vlad took pleasure in violence. It was all he really understood. He'd laugh at the flaying of his prisoners' feet, the flesh shorn off and covered in stinging salt. He would delight in seeing his enemies scream in pain. This was the same man who was lied to by one of his concubines. She had tried to gain favor by telling him she was pregnant with his child. He didn't believe her. After proving his point with a knife, he told his people, "Let the world see where I have been." He was an evil man. His mind was filled with paranoia. But if truth be told, he had every right not to trust. All around him were principalities that bought their safety from the Ottomans. Cowards, Vlad thought, all of them paying tribute in gold, grain, and at times their own children. And so he chose another path. Wallachia wouldn't pay. Vlad told his people, 300,000 of them, they would have no foreign master. He would keep them safe from the Muslim hordes. He ruled with perfect order, but an order forged in violence. When he promised that no one in his kingdom would starve, he meant it. But this was Vlad we're talking about. His policies always came at a cost. The beggars, the cripples, the vagrants, they were all invited to a great banquet. People whispered in the street, could it really be true? Vlad the merciful? Vlad the gentle and kind? The poorest and most downtrodden in the kingdom amassed at his castle. They filled their plates with meat and fish, their goblets overflowing with wine, the finest fare in all of Wallachia. With their bellies full, they sang Vlad's name in celebration. He stood up at the table and shouted to the crowd, some now dizzy with wine, some of them blind, some with missing limbs, "Do you want to be without cares, lacking nothing in this world?" "Yes," they all shouted back in unison. Tears of happiness ran down their cheeks. "No one will be poor in my realm." Cheers rang out. Feet stamped on the floor as goblets were held up in celebration. And Vlad was a man of his word. The Ottomans he so deeply hated and feared were far more capable than he was of taking care of their poor. They ran soup kitchens and homeless shelters. They had free hospitals for the sick and the lame. He couldn't compete with that. But he did as he promised. The poorest and the hungry were soon gone from his realm. When the banquet was nearly over, the crowd full and grateful, still praising his generosity, he rose and walked out through the heavy wooden doors. His men barred them behind him. Burning arrows struck the walls. Resin caught fire. The timber went up and there was no escape. They choked on the smoke or perished in the flames. Maybe 200 of them, possibly 600. The exact figure isn't known. The chronicles don't get bogged down with numbers, but the fact remains, Vlad built a furnace for the most needy in his kingdom, and he claimed it was for the greater good. After all, the people he called idle, the criminal leeches, were now all gone. He tended to the desperate without spending more than the cost of a meal. Was it fear or mercy? The threat to Vlad's rule didn't come from the poor. They were merely an inconvenience. It was the other nobles that he had to worry about, the same people who had murdered his family. When Vlad returned to Wallachia, he had most of them arrested. He used them as forced labor to rebuild the ruins of the Castle Poenari, his new home at the top of a mountain. High up and away from danger, it stood at the top of almost 1,500 stone stairs. It was now Castle Dracula. built with the hands of the purged, many old and frail who died in their labor. If this tale of vengeance and terror sent chills down your spine, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories of history's most horrifying figures. Know someone who thrives on the darker side of the past? Share this video and see if they can handle it. When he announced he'd come back to Wallachia to reclaim the throne, it wasn't just ambition. His father had been overthrown and killed in a rebellion involving local boyars and Hungarian forces. These same boyars had also played a role in the death of his eldest brother. So now that Vlad was back, he wanted to talk. It was Easter when he summoned almost every last boyar in Wallachia to an audience at his residence, hundreds of them. Each one of them was too wealthy, too powerful to imagine what was in store for them. The message Vlad had sent was one of conciliation, but again, he was lying. They dined on venison and piglet roasted over an open flame. It was seasoned to perfection with pepper and cinnamon that had traveled for months along the trade routes from the east. They ate pike from the local rivers and cheese from mountain goats, honey cakes and sweet pastries for dessert, washed down with locally made wine and plum brandy. As cauldrons steamed in the kitchens and smoke from the fires wafted through the great hall, Vlad stood up at the table. The old elites looked up, their bellies full, their minds racked with suspicion. "Who have you served throughout your life?" he asked. Some shouted back, their replies revealing that they had shifted their loyalties many times over the years. They had supported whoever could line their pockets. That included Vlad's own brother and father, until someone else offered a better deal. Vlad's men rounded them up. The elderly were impaled immediately outside the castle. The young and fit marched for 50 long miles. It was a death march medieval style. Those who were strong got straight to work. With swords pointed at their backs, they lifted heavy stones, laboring for weeks on end with barely any sustenance to power them. Men whose soft hands were used to only counting money were now slaves. One by one, they collapsed from exhaustion. When they could no longer work, Vlad had his men impale them alive, a sharp stick driven through their internal organs. Each one was left out in the road for anyone who passed. It was a message written in blood. This is what happens to deceivers, to men who are disloyal. With the old nobles purged, he needed men who would die for him. Not ancient family names, not landed aristocrats, men who toiled on the farms and would sacrifice everything for a noble leader. Vlad was building a peasant army, an inspiration for the tyrants of the future. He gathered loyal farmers, soldiers, enforcers, mercenaries, and outsiders from other lands. Some were hardened fighters, some were thugs, but they were dependent on him, and that is all that mattered. These men, the thousands of them, became his instruments of power, and they were excellent and loyal workers. They spied for him, they arrested people, and they punished them with a vengeance. And that's when justice in Wallachia became swift and spectacular. A thief might be crushed under a heavy cartwheel, a traitor flayed with a sharp knife, a rebel's impaled body displayed as a warning to everyone else. This was Vlad's new power base, ruthless, obedient, and incredibly effective. Without them, his rule would not have survived a season, never mind years. The Ottomans surrounded Wallachia on all sides. They were pragmatic people. Pay tribute and you can practice Christianity. Wallachia under Vlad was still technically a vassal state. It was still expected to pay. The Ottomans were unbeatable, too powerful, too advanced for small states to form a resistance. How did Vlad respond? When it came to the Turks, he had very little time for tolerance. They tried to make amends, but he wasn't interested. Once they sent an envoy, ambassadors from the mighty Sultan Mehmed II, ruler of a vast and formidable empire, with one message: pay and your kingdom will remain under your control. We don't want war. Vlad invited the ambassadors into his castle. He offered them comfort and food. It seemed like his intentions were good, until the Turks refused to remove their turbans. They apologized. It was a religious custom, not an insult. Vlad had his men hold them down one by one. As the Turks screamed out, their apologies went unheard. Vlad's men drove long spikes through their heads, nailing their turbans in place for the rest of their very short lives. Word soon spread. Vlad was upsetting the order of things. He was becoming a thorn in the side of everyone around him, and he was just getting started. He needed money. He needed goods. His small kingdom was locked in, surrounded by towns and villages of Germans and Turks. They were not prepared for what came at them. Vlad's ruthless army, raiders prepared to enact the worst atrocities heard about in centuries. He sent them to the neighboring Transylvania, Brasov and Sibiu, thriving centers of commerce and a home to a large population of German merchants. Situated on busy trade routes, they were known for their riches. They didn't know what hit them. Vlad's men didn't just loot. They set the outskirts ablaze, turning the sky black with smoke. People ran screaming as they were cut down one by one. As the merchants watched from behind the city walls, Vlad turned the fields into a forest of stakes, impaling thousands to send a message. Raid after raid followed in the same vein, mass slaughter, everything burned. In his wake, he left masses of innocent citizens dead, their bodies impaled on stakes. His men would throw people into cauldrons of boiling water. Officials and citizens alike, all across southern Transylvania, settlements and towns were plundered and burned to the ground. This was an open rebellion. Vlad was raiding Ottoman territories, towns no longer able to pay tribute because Vlad had left nothing and no one behind. Vlad the Impaler had to be stopped. All over Europe, people heard his name, his actions described in Saxon medieval chronicles. Like the time he entered a town and gathered up 300 locals, he boiled every one of them in batches, one after another, until their meat was tender. Those he left alive were forced to eat the meat, mothers eating sons, husbands eating wives. Stories printed in what was effectively a tabloid media of the Middle Ages. He was a madman. An accusation perfectly encapsulated by what happened in April of 1459 at the Transylvanian city of Dracul. This was a beautiful place surrounded by mountains, with the castle walls supposed to keep men like Vlad from entering. His men pillaged and burned down the houses. He gathered up the men, the women, and the children and took each of them to the hill by the chapel of St. James. It was there that he ordered his men to set up a table for his lunch. As he filled his stomach with stolen food, he watched the townsfolk, young and old, impaled on spikes, their blood seeping down the poles. The chronicle said that he had dipped his bread in the blood of his victims because watching human blood flow gave him courage. It seemed that some of his soldiers didn't have the same beliefs. One of them once covered his mouth because of the stink of human flesh. Vlad ordered his men to impale him. This is how Vlad turned impalement into a strategy. Each stake used for impalement might have come from the forest. There was no shortage of trees at the foothills of the Carpathian Mountains, and since many of the buildings he burned down were made from wood, there would have been plenty of stake material on offer. Oak would have worked well. Its strength would be ideal for holding up an impaled body. And there were thousands of impalements. That meant cutting branches, stripping off of the bark for extra smoothness, and sharpening one end. Time-wise, maybe 20 to 30 minutes just to make the stake, and another 10 minutes to dig the hole to hold the stake in the ground once the person was impaled. Vlad's men likely greased the sharpened pole. As for thickness, it had to be strong enough to hold up a man. The spike was then bashed with a mallet. It was about the only way you could force something that big into a man's body. The pole and the impaled man could be fixed into a hole in the ground. His own body weight would likely ensure he gradually slid down the stake. How long the person survived isn't well understood. There would have been massive internal bleeding, even if the pole missed the heart and the lungs. In Egypt, where impalement was also practiced, some people were said to still be breathing after 3 hours. Grim reports of impalement in Indonesia said Dutch soldiers slaughtered about 10,000 ethnic Chinese in the 1740 Batavia massacre. But Vlad the Impaler, the master of horror, he might have been more exact. The chronicles suggest his stakes didn't always pop out randomly in the shoulder or the chest. No, his technique was better. The stake's journey through the body ended by protruding from the victim's mouth. Not always, but if done well, yes. If this is true, it would have taken considerable skill. These men were thugs, not surgeons. They couldn't control internal trauma or know that they wouldn't hit bones. They had no method of knowing the trajectory mouthward was correct except for experience. In real life, it's almost certain that the impalement would have been much messier than the chronicles suggest. It would have taken a long time. Documents state that he could impale thousands a day, one time as many as 30,000 in just one morning. If the stakes were all already sharpened and the holes pre-dug, the impaling could have been like a production line. If it took 3 men for the operation, the absolute fastest they could have done it was probably around 10 minutes, and that is being very generous. That is 6 per hour. 72 a day for 3-man crews. For 30,000 impalements, he'd need 417 crews of 3 men, over 1,200 men in total, working 12 straight hours without breaks or anything going wrong. But it said he did that in one morning, so now that is 834 crews and almost 3,000 men for 6 hours of work. It would have more likely been 30 minutes per victim. That's only 12 impalements for one crew of 3 over 6 hours. Logistically, 30,000 in one morning could have been medieval psyops. Maybe it wasn't, though. Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II was getting a little concerned about so many people in his territories being impaled. Not only would Vlad not pay the jizya, or the tax on non-Muslims, he wouldn't stop killing either. The Ottomans fought back, sawing Vlad's main ally, the Hungarian regent Michael Szilágyi, in half. However, some sources say it was a beheading. Mehmed's men crossed the Danube. Vlad captured some of them and impaled them, many of them young boys forced into service. By this time, he was engaging in ethnic cleansing, killing any Muslim he came across. The Turks responded by entering Wallachia and slaughtering Christians. As armies of Turks were hot on Vlad's trail, he slaughtered livestock and attempted to poison water sources so they couldn't use them after he left. It was medieval germ warfare, and it was about to get ugly. Vlad gathered up all the sick he could find, those afflicted with leprosy, tuberculosis, and the plague. Each of them was forced to dress in Turkish fashion with the order to intermingle with the enemy soldiers. Vlad was now killing his enemies from within. The Ottomans had a much bigger force, maybe over 150,000, compared to Vlad's army of about 30,000. Maybe. The numbers might not be exact. But it is true that his men weren't all trained soldiers. He had no choice but to rely on underhanded tactics. It worked. If he burned everything down, a scorched earth campaign, those behind him would be left hungry and without shelter. But by June 1462, Mehmed had advanced deep into Wallachia. He was now barely 60 miles from Targoviste. Victory seemed close. And then, on June 17th, under the cover of darkness, Vlad made his move. Close to midnight, Vlad and his cavalry slipped into the Ottoman compound. They had already studied its layout. Their target was the tent of Mehmed. The alarm was raised, but it was too late. Chaos erupted as Vlad's men moved through the camp, slaughtering half-naked Turks in the darkness. Wallachian riders cut through canvas walls and rope lines. Horses bolted. Tents collapsed in on themselves as Vlad's men set everything they saw on fire. Smoke filled the air. It was almost impossible to tell who was who. Among the shouting and screams and the sound of flesh being hacked and sliced, Vlad's best men walked deeper into the camp. Where was the Sultan? They cut their way toward the royal pavilion, but in the confusion they somehow got the wrong tent. Exactly what happened is unknown, but Mehmed was already gone, now surrounded by his Ottoman guards. The element of surprise was gone. Before dawn, Vlad and his men got on their horses and left. Their best chance at defeating a force much larger than themselves was gone. But the raid proved something no one thought possible. Vlad's ragtag army of peasants, murderers, and thieves were up to the task. They had just killed around 15,000 Turks in one night. The Ottomans were not as untouchable as everyone had thought. News even got over to Pope Pius II. He'd heard how Vlad the Impaler was a force of nature. After the same pope had ordered a crusade against Islam, Vlad was now a rising star in the eyes of the Catholic Church, saving Europe from Islam. But Mehmed wasn't finished. He regrouped and again focused on taking Targoviste. This time he made it all the way to the city. The gates were wide open. The city was deathly quiet. Not one soldier stood in his way. The only thing that greeted him was a stink, a horrible smell of decomposing bodies. A forest of impaled men about 2 miles long and half a mile wide. It was psychological warfare. With that forest of corpses in front of them, Mehmed gave the order to retreat. The specter of fear worked. The perfect tactic against a much more powerful foe. The victory was talked about all over Europe. The amazing but ruthless man they called Vlad Dracula, the son of the dragon, had scared away the indomitable Ottomans. But even monsters faced their limits. No one was rejoicing, not in Wallachia. The Ottomans had laid waste to many towns and villages. Thousands had been slaughtered or taken prisoner. Vlad had lost the confidence of his people. He had gone too far. The Sultan may have run, but he had a plan: divide and conquer. He supplied Vlad's brother with a small army of Turks. Hungry for power, the younger brother, Radu III of Wallachia, known as Radu the Handsome, had made a pact. He had agreed to find what was left of the boyar elites, and together they would end Vlad's bloody reign of terror. Radu agreed to the terms with the Sultan, and this horrid war would stop. And just like his father and brother, Vlad now found himself pitted against the noble class. Now the invasion wasn't coming from the outside of his borders, it was coming from within. He had no choice but to flee. He headed north. There he spent years in captivity, a prince without a throne. His captor, the Hungarian king Matthias Corvinus, had once been hailed as a defender of Christendom. Not anymore. He wasn't in a position to be seen supporting Vlad lest he'd provoke the Ottomans into war. For Vlad, it wasn't a bad deal. It was like less of a brutal imprisonment in a dungeon than a comfortable house arrest. Corvinus was on Vlad's side, but politics demanded he keep Vlad locked up and away from his people. But years passed, and Corvinus eventually recognized Vlad as the lawful prince of Wallachia. Vlad didn't have the men or the resources for another attack to regain his seat of power. He had to stay put. But Vlad would fight again. Under Corvinus, he waged a war of terror against the Ottoman forces, another round of massacres of civilians, impalements, and scorched earth. He would die fighting with an army of about 2,000 troops in late 1476 or early 1477. His body was cut to pieces. The head was sent to his longtime enemy Sultan Mehmed, and later preserved and placed high up for everyone to see in Constantinople. He was gone, but the legend lived on. Vlad the Impaler, Dracula, the man who had achieved the impossible, a terror tactician of the Middle Ages. Vlad the Impaler made his enemies wish they had never been born, but he wasn't the only ruler with an iron and bloody fist. Watch Most Brutal Queens in History next, or click here for another terrifying tale.